Warm greetings from Finland and Firstbeat, and welcome to today's sports webinar, Monitoring Adaptations Using Heart Rate Responses in Submaximal Exercise, with our guests Martin Buchheit, Tzlil Shushan, and Shaun McLaren, who I will welcome on stage in just a couple of minutes. I'm Tina Hoffman, exercise physiologist and master trainer at Firstbeat. I work with our wellness business, and today I'll be hosting the session. We're going to have 1 hour time today, and the Q&A box is open during the webinar, and we'll check your questions, and the guys might take the questions already during the presentation, or we'll save them in the end. And if we don't get to all the questions today, we have a second session in 2 weeks, so then we can also continue at that time. And of course, we are also recording the webinar, so you will get a recording afterwards in our thank you email. Couple of words about Firstbeat, because we have a lot of listeners online who might be new to us. If you are new, I invite you to go to our website. We have a lot of background about our science and our methods there. And of course, you're also welcome to contact our sports team to learn more. But basically we have over 20 years of experience in providing physiological solution for elite team sports. And today we have over 1,000 professional sports teams across all the major leagues using the Firstbeat sports solution to improve the performance of athletes, and over 300 scientific publications that have used some of the Firstbeat methods as part of their studies. And sort of why we are here today, how we are all connected. So Firstbeat, our sports team, just launched the submaximal fitness testing earlier this fall. It's a new feature that belongs to all of you who are using the Firstbeat sports solution. And Martin and his colleagues recently published 20 years worth of research on heart rate responses to submaximal exercise. So we had really good synergy in this area, and that's kind of how we put together this webinar. And at this point, I would like to welcome the guest speakers, the expert guests on stage, led by Martin Buchheit, who is currently high performance lead at Aspetar. He has over 20 years of experience in professional sports with focus in performance, rehabilitation, and research. He's considered one of the top sports scientists in the world with over 250 scientific papers and 2 best-selling books under his belt. And he'll be joined in discussion today by Tzlil Shushan, who is joining us from down under at 5 a.m. He's a sports scientist and lecturer at the University of Wollongong. And Shaun McLaren, who is consultant, sports scientist, and strength and conditioning coach at the moment at Newcastle Red Bulls. These guys all have really expressive resumes, and I'm sure you'll hear more about them in just a minute. But welcome on stage, and I'll let you take it from here, Martin.
Awesome. Thanks for the intro, Tina, and for launching the webinar. We are all very, very excited to be with you, definitely. And as Tina mentioned, so 20 years of research summarized in this paper, which is obviously big, definitely for us. And we're going to be able to hopefully go through all the details from this very big paper through those 2 parts. And maybe before we start, we wanted to have a bit of an overview of your experience, guys, and the audience, you guys that who are connected, to know if you guys have been using the submaximal test. So we have a bit of a poll, and you will be able to participate to that and give us a bit of an overview of where you are when it comes to using the submaximal testing. So it looks like the big majority, close to 60% of the current people in the room are not using a submaximal test, which is perfect. That's why you're here and you want to hear about us. So awesome. Hopefully, and I'm sure we're gonna be able to help. I see that some people also, that's about 40% are already using it, and you may have questions about your current use. So I'm sure you're gonna have some answers throughout this journey as well with us. So. Very good. Okay, I think that's a nice snapshot. Thank you, Shaun, for putting this up. I don't know, shall we? Yeah, we almost have 75% have responded. Shall we? I think maybe you can leave it open, and shall we keep on? Okay, so back now to the slides. I've lost them about that. You can still see the slides, right? All good, huh? So as you know, guys, 2 parts. So today we're gonna try to go through a lot hopefully. We're gonna discuss a bit of the history. We'll discuss the indices, the heart rate recovery, and so on. We're gonna spend some time going through the protocols. Then validity, what do we capture, what we are not capturing, do we capture fatigue, and so on. And then we'll discuss a little bit about standardization and when to perform the test. So that the second part will be a bit more technical around the statistic, interpreting changes, this kind of thing. So hopefully that's the plan for today. So without further ado, I'd like you maybe, Tzlil, if you don't mind, would you just tell us a bit your definition about submaximal testing and go through that if you don't mind?
Yeah, cool, Martin. Thank you. And thank you, everyone. It's great to be here. I think, Shaun, you just asked me to have the second pull up, right? So do you want to share the
Yeah, we'll
result?
pull now.
Yeah, you put it up? Yeah.
That's up.
Yeah, so I think like we just a little bit interested that if you are using submaximal fitnesses or even considering it, what would be your main reason to decide of doing it, or what is the main reason that you're currently doing it? So we'll give it a little bit of time. Yeah. It looks like that the non-exhaustive nature of it becomes the most relevant with about 50%. I'll keep the poll open, Shaun, and you can manage, and I'll have a go. Okay, so again, it's great to be here and thank you everyone for joining us. I think it's a good idea to kind of start what we actually mean by submaximal testing, especially when about 60% of you say that you're not currently using it, but would love to. So it's basically something that builds on Martin's 2014 world later on paper on heart rate monitoring. And over the past decade, and especially in the last few years during my PhD work, we've been able to build on that foundation with some new contexts, environments, and practical guidelines. In our more recent framework review paper in 2022, we defined submaximal testing as a short exercise bout undertaken at a standardized intensity that is intended to be non-exhausting and performed with the purpose of inferring physiological state through the monitoring of relevant outcome measure. So in team sport, these exercises usually involve running protocols, and the intensity is standardized by external training load variables such as time and speed. And the focus would be on monitoring the physiological or internal responses to this load. And we'll discuss a lot about heart rate derived outcome measure, etc. And yeah, this kind of under external control conditions. And more importantly, these responses are assumed to reflect the physiological function of the athletes and their aerobically related performance capacity. Martins, to you quickly.
Yes, very good, very good. I think that's a nice definition. I think as a start, when we wanted to discuss a bit the history, I think we have to say that it's not new, even though you mentioned the 2014 paper. But if we look at the literature, the submaximal test has been around for a while. And I think it's just worth adding this is that we are not reinventing the wheel at all. We are often just, like building on the shoulders of giants of the physiology as well. You have some names into it, like if you think about Bruce, for example, yeah, the first paper we found out was 1949. So that's a while ago, and the principle was exactly the same. So we just probably slowly transition to make it more applied to our context, especially team sport. That's what we're discussing mainly today. But the principle have been the same for 75 years, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I think we kind of borrow those principles from those clinical settings that said maximal testing is not advisable due to risk issues or concerns. So we are borrowing it and try to develop it a bit more in our context, for sure.
Exactly. So I think as a start, maybe Shaun, would you maybe talk us a bit to what are we actually measuring? What is the concept behind monitoring heart rate in this case? What are we trying to infer from heart rate?
Yeah, I think, with anything, personally, I always like to go right back to the books and where we should be starting. And the first question that we always ask is, should this actually work? Is it physiologically sound? Is there a rational theory behind it? And I guess we, like all those guys before us, think that for exercise heart rate as an outcome measure in a submaximal test to get an idea of somebody's cardiorespiratory fitness, it is very well justified. If you think about the energetic demand of muscle that's supported by cardiac output, and then we're looking at cardiac control of the heart via the autonomic nervous system. So put in real simple terms, and I know Tzlil and Martin are both much fitter than I, if we all run at 12 kilometers an hour, I would more than likely have a higher exercise heart rate because I have a lower stroke volume that is reflective of my fitness. So my energetic demand at the muscle and my oxygen demand and aerobic demand is much higher. So it's well physiologically supported. And I guess it's probably just worth mentioning now that we are focusing exclusively on the exercise heart rate response. In theory, things like heart rate variability and heart rate recovery should tell you a little bit more about the parasympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic saturation. From our experience, those as outcome measures are just really noisy, far less reliable than exercise heart rate. And from all the work we've done, whether it's published or just applied case studies, when we add those extra outcome measures to the information we're already getting from exercise heart rate, we're not finding any new information. So we're trying to be real kind of pragmatic with all this. And I guess the final thing I'll probably say on this, and why I always think it's good to have this as a grounding, is if you look at this as a physiological model of exercise heart rate as an outcome measure in Submax, anything that can affect the autonomic nervous system or stroke volume that isn't cardiorespiratory fitness is what we would call a nuisance variable. It's going to change heart rate even though your fitness hasn't changed. So just bear that in mind because that's going to be really important for some of the things that Martin's going to discuss in just a few slides' time.
Yeah, no, very good point. And just on your comment on heart rate recovery, for example, I think we all tried at some stage, but it's just so odd to ask players to stand still for 1 or 2 minutes after having run. That if he has to bring really a lot of value to be able to ask this more, and most of the time he does not. So it's also just sometimes a bit more common sense, if the burden is too high in relation to a value that we don't see. So I think good point on that. Okay, so maybe before we really dive into the mechanisms and so on, and as I said, we're going to spend a lot of time discussing around the protocols and so on. Maybe I can take you through. It's almost a bit. There's some. I'm not saying it's not serious, but it's a bit of like there's some humor behind that in the way we can say why should we use and what should we test? What should we try to track cardiovascular fitness? And I put myself in the situation that I've been, and I'm sure many of people in the audience will have been as well, where there's some discussion about the work of the fitness staff, for example. So let's start from the left. There would be a match. What happens if you win the match and everyone has and what about the running, Because I mean the shortcut is that people take running as a KPI. People think that if you run more, it's better and so on. So I would say if you won, doesn't matter if you run more or less than the opponent. But now if you lose, of course, we open an investigation because you try to understand why have we lost. And if now we've been running more than the opponent, everyone will say, well, bad luck because we were running more, we were likely fit. And for the physical medic part department, everyone can say, okay, it's not our fault then if we lost because the guys ran more, so they were likely fit. When it becomes interesting is more if now, let's say, we have lost, but in addition, the opponent has run more than us. Then everyone is start to freak out saying, okay, if they run more than us, it's because we're not fit. So then we have to investigate, are we really unfit or not? And this is where I believe that having those regular check-in, this embed monitoring with the Submax runs is able to, that's probably a way to answer the question, are we fit or not? And in this case, the trend for the last Submaximal run will say, okay, maybe they were trending positively. Positivity means we were fit, but despite that we lost. So that's going back to not our fault. Players are fit, we're good. But now, if actually there's a negative trend and we can tend to see that players are losing a bit of fitness, okay, that's probably a red flag for everyone to start to understand what's happening and try to start some intervention around that. So that's an example among many others as a way to put a little bit the perspective and the interest of a test like that. Anything to add, my colleagues, on this? All good?
No, I think we've all been there before, and yeah, it's like you said, Martin. It's a nice humorous thing, but it's a genuine like where else do you go to in the middle of the season when the last time you done the IFT was in June and you've just been beaten in February and you haven't done it since, right? So we need some other kind of objective way to back up what is effectively our opinion against other people's opinion, and this, I mean, for us, like it's been a really valuable tool, right?
Yeah, bring some objectivity, definitely. Very good. Okay, so the next slide we had, I'm gonna leave it for Shaun maybe. We ran the poll before already, so you guys started to go through that. These are not the results from one of the study that Tzlil run. So I'll leave you go through that if you want to comment on the different findings from this survey.
Yeah, I think I'm probably stealing Tzlil's thunder here because he led all the work on this, and this is his survey study on why do people do submax? What's the lay of the land of submax in the field? And this is out in IGSPP. Tzlil had responses here from over 60 practitioners from 24 different countries around the world, and for the ones that had or still were implementing submax, more than three-quarters of them said that it was because it was time efficient and non-exhaustive. So you guys have responded to the poll. You're only allowed to pick one, not multiple ones. And non-exhaustive in nature came up at 43% from everyone who's on the webinar right now. So that's 60 out of our 140 odd people attending here. After that, there was, what have we got? We've got test specificity is 15% of people who thought that trumped the reason why. And then around about 16% of people said sensitivity to training effects. Interestingly, time efficiency only came out at around about 7%. But a lot of that kind of corroborates with what we're seeing here, in that people would agree that when you've tried and tested it, submax testing is time efficient, it's not exhaustive, it is sensitive, it changes when it's meant to and it doesn't when it's not meant to, and it's quite easy to schedule. But there's kind of other reasons in terms of athletes and coaches buy into it, and the test is specific to the sport. I'd almost go glass half empty on that one and say that 2/3 of people don't think that. So keep that in mind. The athlete and the coach buy-in might still be a barrier we have to break down here, and that's something that we're going to touch on in the second part of the webinar. But to kind of paraphrase Martin, when we talk about this figure normally, the bullet point is for us, you can't cheat a submax. With your traditional ways to test cardiorespiratory fitness, be it the yo-yo, IFT, distance or time trials, there's always elements of potentially pacing, unless it's a graded exercise test like the yo-yo or the IFT. And even in those, it depends on the player's motivation and willingness to go maximal on that day. With a submax, it is what it is. You are just measuring the heart rate response to exercise. Again, there's going to be nuisance variables, but we know a little bit about them, and we know how to potentially account for them and control for them as well.
Yes, and it's funny because I was discussing about that no later than this morning with some guys in Aspetar when I'm spending my time at the moment. First day, second day of preseason, you maybe don't want to smash players with a maximal test immediately, but everyone can do a submax as well. So that was probably the discussion we had about preseason testing, and of course in the context of rehab, we'll discuss that in later at some stage. But you cannot even go maximal during rehab, so that's probably the only thing you have as well. So yeah, the non-exhaustive nature, we talked about that, but okay, very good. I think it's important now to start about more talking about the terminology, because we're going to transition to the different protocols and the different ways to implement it. So that's also part of one of your very, very nice publication, Tzlil. So I'll let you comment on that one about the terminology.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. So yeah, this is a kind of a good segue to go into the kind of definitions. I think Shaun and I've started another poll now that I'll probably give a few. Yeah, give a few.
Maybe we need to explain a little bit to make
Yeah,
sure
I think
everyone
I'll
understand
do
what
it
it
while
is.
I think I'll do it while the poll is running. Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
So submaximal tests generally fall into 5 main categories, or type if you want, and it based two on main distinction levels. The first is based on the exercise regimen, whether the activity is continuous or intermittent in nature. And the second distinction relates to how the intensity is prescribed throughout the exercise. It can be fixed, same intensity for the entire test. It can be incremental, where the intensity gradually increases, or variable, where the intensity changes naturally across movements. So let's dive into some examples. Continuous fixed protocols. These are by the far most common conducted today. They are typically involve running at a fixed intensity and typically for 3 to 5 minutes, with the main aim or idea of reaching a steady state heart rate response toward the end. In most professional settings that we've seen, it's either shuttle or overrun for 4 minutes at about 12 kilometers per hour. Continuous incremental protocols, these include progressive increase in intensity, and this can be within a single bout or across repeated bouts. And this approach basically allows to monitor physiological responses across different or accumulated submaximal intensities. And this is quite common more in endurance athletes, such as triathletes and cyclists, that they have the kind of established protocols for it. Intermittent fix, you can see in gray. This is not as relevant for heart rate monitoring. include more kind of high intensity short bouts that we typically use when we collect neuromuscular responses alongside those physiological heart rate responses. But we typically do not use them when the main outcome measure is exercise heart rate or heart rate related variables. Intermittent incremental, these protocols have built-in recovery periods where the intensity gradually increases. So basically, in most cases, or not all cases, they are kind of include shorter versions of established maximal fitness testing, such as Martin's 30-15 intermittent fitness test. And when I started to dive into submax test a little bit more, it was quite interesting to see that quite a bit of researchers and practitioners, as you can see in the figure, are using these protocols. And I think that it came from two main reasons. The first one is maybe they were kind of not as consistent or established recommendations for submax protocols when monitoring exercise heart rate. And the second one, it looks like that many researchers often sought to collect two data points at the same time. So they were basically collecting heart rate responses from the first few minutes of the test and then continued the test to exhaustion and then also have a maximal performance outcome, which is quite smart, but not necessarily the most appropriate protocol. It might be better ways to do it. And finally, and very shortly, intermittent variables protocols, they include protocols that are more sport specific and the external load fluctuate naturally during these drills. They've been utilized using standardized passing drill or standardized small-sided games. And we will discuss quite a bit on those protocols in part 2 of the webinar. And I think it will just leave it a little bit like that for now, and we'll dive into it a little bit more when we discuss in part 2.
Yeah, very good, very good. So maybe again to progress on starting now really to show you some examples of implementations. There's few videos coming in the next slide, but maybe I think each of us we can go through our favorite format if you want. So I'll start. There's also the chronologically and the video you'll see after. So when I've been implementing that in my context, mainly European football. That's the top left setup where we use the football pitch and players run. They run like in the shape of an 8, and it's super easy to implement because like football pitch is 100 and something in length. On the width is 60 something. So you can almost. I do it with a few steps. I don't need even to mark it, and every bout of run is actually 50 meters. Which means that if you run in 15 seconds, those 50 meters, you're straight at 12 km per hour. So very quick to set up and very easy. Yeah, very quick to set up and to do in terms of the pacing as well. Then Shaun has more experience using shuttles, right?
Yeah, and shuttles just kind of work for us in rugby because, and I'm rugby union, not league, so we have really large squad sizes, as do AFL, but we don't have the huge pitch as well. So we're on like 100 by 70, and I've got sometimes up to 55 guys to run at once. I envy Martin being able to do the figure 8 protocol because I think in an ideal world, it is a lot more relaxed. It feels less like a test. You'll see this real soon. For me, being like a sole practitioner running this, it's a lot easier to, if I want to get a standardized distance, I can just go speed is distance over time. So we go try line to the halfway, which is 50 meters. We go there and back. Right now we're running a 3-minute protocol. So it's try line to halfway and back 6 times. And that gives us our 3-minute run. So you're simply here on a shuttle protocol. Speed is distance over time. We correct for change of direction at around about 0.7 seconds. So it takes about 0.7 seconds to change direction. You minus that time from your shuttle length to work out the speed. Typically and originally we would say, right, we want to run at 12 kilometers an hour. And when you take into account the change of direction time, that means you've got to do 50 meters in something strange like 15.3 seconds. And I'm there with a stopwatch and a whistle, and I'm like, how do I measure 15.3 on my stopwatch? What we found from all the work we've done, Tzlil's going to touch on this a lot more when he talks about the results of his meta-analysis. It doesn't really matter if you're running at 12 kilometers an hour or 12.5 or 13.21, as long as that speed is always consistent. The key thing is exercise intensity, which is exercise heart rate, is probably between 70 and 90%. Dead simply, if it's less than 70, it's probably not enough of an exercise stimulus for a trained athlete. If it's more than 90, it's probably not submaximal. So we've had a great question as well just on this in terms of if we want to do a continuous fixed test, should we calculate the speed with critical speed? If LT1's not known, should it be the speed between LT1 and critical speed or below? Physiologically, we probably want to be at or around that first lactate threshold, LT1, rather than critical speed. Pragmatically, I think we can just stick anywhere around, like if it's a team sport athlete, we know that it's probably going to be around about 10 to 13 Ks an hour, and you're just looking for where that heart rate response is going to be. So that's kind of why we have a running speed of 11.8, because for me, it's exactly 16 seconds, and I have my 25-meter cones. So I'm either blowing the whistle or just doing a quick check every 25 meters, every 8 seconds, or when we change direction.
Yeah, just to insist on that, this is a very, very important point. The way you explain it, that matters really. It's easier to have a precise, exact number of seconds, which makes it easier. And who cares if it's 11.8 or 12.2, as long as it's reproducible. So think about, because you might, anyone in the audience might want to do over another distance. Think first about practicality, as long as the speed is around this range. It doesn't have to be 12, it doesn't have to be 13. Think practical, definitely. Tzlil?
You've covered brilliantly everything, man. Oh, good.
So okay, so let's look at the video. So you'll see again those different protocols. So that's PhD right now doing this 8 shape. Well, you see the pace. Put cones. That just someone just actually didn't pass the cone. So of course that's important because you want to standardize the speed as well. And always, because I've been showing this video a while, and every time you see those guys, you just saw Mbappe and Neymar running through it. So I said, if those guys could do it, everyone can do it. It's always my joke, but true. On this one, you see how Shaun is so at ease. You saw him is with his white top in the middle, and looks like you never swallowed that whistle, right? Running with it in your mouth.
No, still going, and I've probably had a little bit more confidence now to just look left and right as well.
Well done.
Whistleless.
What is this one, Tzlil?
Yeah, so this is one of the female senior player competing nationally that they do a same. This is a 50-meter shuttle one for 4 minutes at approximately 11 kilometers per hour. This will be the swans here, Martin, and we can get some kudos to Adriano Aguirre-Soli that is leading it as part of his PhD. And this is with Nick with the Giants, Martin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And came from one of Adriano's publications for his PhD, when he looked on some of the agreement when you do intermittent variable protocol, and this is a standardized kicking drill that they used to do in the GWS Giants.
Yeah, so this last example, we're now changing completely the paradigm. Instead of having a fixed exercise, something highly standardized, there is still some sort of standardization through the passing drill, but it's something different, and we'll discuss more in detail into the part 2, because you guys have also shown that if you adjust for the work done, you can improve also the outcome and so on. So there's a bit of another level of sophistication in terms of analysis. But at least you've seen the main implementation, the 8 shape, the shuttles, whether we've shown in Newcastle or the girls in Australia. And then you've seen the oval, which is the most continuous because there's no change of direction. So you've seen the three main protocols. I'm just checking here before we move on about now tracking heart rate and really looking at the outcomes. There might be a few questions in the audience, or you just raised your hand, Shaun.
I've just got the poll results, Martin. So before Tzlil started discussing, we asked which protocols, whether you would do this or not, or whether you are or you haven't, or you're not sure yet. Based on the protocols and that little taxonomy, we showed which one would fit you the best in your environment. And like most of the things we've seen, whether it's research or surveys that we've done or people we work with, continuous fix seems to be the trump. And I think that just aligns with the whole philosophy of Submax. What's the easiest one to do? Let's just get them running at a continuous intensity, 3-4 minutes. Interestingly, after that, we've got intermittent incremental. This comes up trump so much in the research in particular, because the original Submax, if you go, how do we shorten a max test to a submax? Let's do our max test, but we'll do the first 4 minutes. First 4 minutes of the IFT, first 4 minutes of the yo-yo. Classic, and I think a lot of people are still doing that. Continuous incremental, this is an interesting one, 20% of people saying that there. So continuous incremental might be 3 minutes at 10 Ks, minute off, 3 minutes at 11, and then 3 minutes at 12, or maybe he's a bit more extreme. Now, from some of my colleagues in football, especially those working in Spain and Portugal, that would be a classic example, not necessarily with those speeds, of the lactate type profile. Maybe it might be 4 stages, and maybe that's why this is coming up trumps, because it fits people's environment as well. But from everyone on the webinar, we've also seen what we see in research and practice, which is around about 15 people are considering these kind of intermittent variable, these drills and games as tests for their submax, which is what you can see on the screen right now.
Yeah, very cool. Thanks for those additions. So let's move now to heart rate, because that's still the outcomes, and we're going to discuss on everything around the interpretation of it. I like just to bring back to where I would say, at least me personally, I started, where of course, like if you go back now 20 years ago soon, we only had those individual watches, and I still remember having to download watches one by one, which would take an hour. Definitely, like if you have a lot of players, and that would be the typical types of curve that we observe when, and in this example, there would be a player at 2 moments in his preseason, and if you already got a bit understanding about what are we looking for and which direction we expect changes in relation to fitness, in relation to what Shaun was explaining a little bit about the stroke volume and the energetical demands, you would have understood now that the purple curve would be start of the preseason, while the red curve will be end of the preseason, where for the same exercise running intensity, in this case 12 kilometer, this Aspire kid back in the days in Qatar, even though this picture is taken in Rome, in Italy, this guy would have lost about 10% of his heart rate, 10% of intensity for the same run, which showing that became way more efficient, and he likely got fitter at the cardiovascular level. So that's how we were doing it a while ago now, and it's not surprising that now that's also why we were so keen to get involved with Firstbeat especially for this topic, is that now the technology thankfully has evolved. Not only the telemetry, which means that you don't have to download because all the data arrives automatically on your iPad, but also all the analysis that comes with it, where instead of going one by one, you can go at the team level, and within a few clicks, you get those measurements of heart rate. You select, as you would split, I'm sure maybe people are familiar with the GPS, when you clip and you select some periods from your drills. In the same with heart rate, you just select the last minute, the last 30 seconds, as we're going to discuss as well. And this is really it's seamless. It's a matter of seconds to extract all this information. That's, as I was saying, was taking hours a while ago. So that's where I believe the technology is really beneficial, because it allows us to save time for other bits, for other things. So in this case, the guys at Firstbeat, they've been very helpful to make this way easier. On this question about, as I was saying, last 30 seconds, last minute as well, Tzlil has done some nice analysis also about the duration of this run and the length of that. So I'll let you comment this very nice graph.
Yeah, sounds good, Martin. Thank you. So basically, this figure will show how the sensor data from a submaximal test will look like. And here you can see data from a continuous fixed protocol that was for 4 minutes on average velocity of 11 kilometers per hour. And this is over 50-meter shuttle runs. On the left side, you can see the mean and standard deviation across, I think, 37 male football senior players. And you can see the actual line and the shaded area for the mean and standard deviation. And on the right, you can see data from random 25 individual players, which basically each panel show an individual unique response profile. With regards to the traces, the blue line represents the running speed, and those small bumps that you can see reflect the stop and start of the shuttles, right? And the pink line shows heart rate response, and you can see that it gradually increases and kind of flattened or going into a more plateau shape at the end. In both our own experience and the published work that we've done, we've been looking on many different ways to quantify exercise heart rate in terms of analytical approaches. And I think Martin touched on it very briefly before. And we've seen that it doesn't really matter in general. We've seen that peak heart rate, different time windows, rolling averages kind of produce reasonable similar results, and the reliability is not affected. But probably the most recommended approach would be to take the mean heart rate over the last 30 or 60 seconds of the test, which can be highlighted at the end of each trace in turquoise color. And another interesting question would be about the duration. So for continuous fixed protocol, we typically recommend 4 minutes of test. I know Martin before when I had these 5 and 5 protocol, it was 5-minute exercise, 5-minute recovery, and then we started drop it based on some of new data. But in the last probably year or so, we've been accumulated a few thousands of tests across different cohorts, sex, contexts, etc. And we've kind of seen that even 3 minutes test might produce quite a reasonable outcome compared to the 4-minute test. And you've just heard Shaun that he's saying that he's using the 3-minute protocol this year, and I think it's new, Shaun, right? You've used to do the 4-minute before. Personally, and I think that also my colleague will say the same, if you can in your environment to go for the 4 minutes, go for it. And this is what I do at the moment, is because it gives you a little bit more confidence in the steady state heart rate, and you have more data points to rely on to make decisions.
So what's your take? Because like I'm still, for example, I'm still doing 4 minutes because sometimes the first minute are a bit noisy. I need players to catch up on the pace. So and I allow myself to go 4 minutes, but I know, Shaun, now you're doing 3, right?
Yeah, Shaun, you want to take it for me? Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a little bit of work that give us 6 months and we'll hopefully have a paper to throw at you. But we think it's practically the heart rate responses we're getting at 3 minutes in team athletes is practically equivalent to what we're getting at 4. There's a slight difference. It's about a 1 percentage point max difference, but it's systematic. Everybody is normally 1 percentage point higher. For us being able to take off an extra minute, it's 25% of the time, even though it's already low. It's an extra 3 shuttles, so we're looking at 200 kind of meters off the actual distance that they travel on the test on the shuttle protocol, for example. And yeah, it's all, I guess this whole thing is like, how do we be more practical? How do we be more pragmatic? And I sort of think we're hunting for that minimum point. I definitely not go below 3 minutes, like you say, Martin. Some of the players have to fit with the pacing. They need time to catch up. Heart rate might actually be coming down from something that's happened before the session. Maybe it's like an anxiety response, things like that. But yeah, we've been running with it, and it's been really useful because we're just managing to make it more practical and feasible.
Yeah. But yeah, imagine 10 years ago, 5+5, because we were thinking that we get more from the recovery, more and so on, and now it's 3. So who doesn't have 3 minutes? Come on, this is nothing.
Yeah, I think as a final point, Martin and Shaun, I believe that you agree that if you have the time for 4 minutes, go for 4 minutes. You will have a little bit more confidence, at least in the beginning, and then you can pilot those 4 minutes in relation to the 3 minutes and make your own decision in your own context as well.
Exactly. We have to be conscious of the time, so I'm gonna maybe accelerate a little bit into understanding the relationship between change in heart rate and change in different variable reflecting cardiovascular fitness. And that's a very nice figure that you have redrawn, shown for the paper. So I think that's definitely your turn to comment on that one.
Well, I had to do something for this figure because none of this is my work. You'll see Buchheit top left, you'll see Shushan top and bottom right, but you won't see my name anywhere. So yeah, I'm a bit of a bandit on this one. Basically, off the back of some work Tzlil did, meta-analysis found really strong correlations with exercise heart rate and maximal tests, and we thought it can't be this good. We tried to break it. We tried to think about what's the effective intensity, duration of the submax protocol. There was no moderating effect on the validity or the reliability. But the question that we had is, okay, that tells us that players with lower heart rates have better performance on max tests. But what about if an individual player changes in themselves their submax heart rate? If it reduces, does their maximal test performance increase? And of all the work that these guys have done that I was lucky enough just to make look pretty, we were interested in particular in maximum aerobic speed because we're programming off it, because we're using it as benchmarking and profiling, because we understand it. We've got good historic data on it. And you can see here straight away that everything points down top left to bottom right. That means there's a strong negative relationship between the change in heart rate on a submax and the change in max aerobic speed. If heart rate drops off on your player's submax, their max aerobic speed has more than likely increased. This is in different cohorts. It's in seniors and youth. It's in male and female. The max aerobic speed tests range from time trials to the VAM-EVAL to actually testing max aerobic speed on the treadmill with oxygen. And the Submax protocols were continuous, they were shuttle run based, all different type. No matter the underlying point is, no matter your Submax type or your max aerobic speed assessment, there's always this strong negative relationship within athletes. When one changes, so is the other one. And we kind of found that anywhere from 2.5 to 5.5 percentage point reduction in submax heart rate is associated with about half a kilometer an hour, improvement in max aerobic speed. So on average, we're looking at, 4, maybe if you want to be conservative, 5 beats percentage points of your heart rate max. The reason why we use 0.5 as a meaningful threshold for max aerobic speed, well, that's one level on the IFT. It's a whole speed level on the yo-yo. And for most, the VAM eval as well, for most ways that we test and profile athletes, this would be that test that we do, you got better by a whole level. And through lack of being able to link it conclusively with anything on the pitch, we think that's probably the next best thing we've got to go with, especially when feeding this back to coaches and players.
Yeah, excellent. And as you said, and you can see actually on those 4 graphs, the coefficient correlation is always around 0.6, 0.7. That means there is this nice trend, this within athlete tendency to show that one is associated with the other, but the correlation is never perfect. And that's probably for us now as I said, to accelerate a little bit and to start to discuss some of, not the limitations, but to take a bit of distance and understanding why the correlation are not perfect and a change in heart rate does not always exactly reflect a change in fitness. That's what I mean. I guess you guys understand when we say the coefficient correlation is 0.6, 0.7, is that one does not explain exactly perfectly the other. And in this case, maybe we can just focus on the figure, the figure on the left, sorry, where that's back in my time in Aspire when we were tracking the football players throughout the season. And in this case, we grouped them based on what happened to their submaximal heart rate between the start and the end of the season. So you have a group of players that showed a decrease in heart rate, which was definitely the majority. So majority of players had a heart rate drop in their submax. That's the blue triangle. And there's another group, all those guys, they showed an increase in heart rate, which if you go back to those correlations we're just showing, if the heart rate increase, you're expecting a lose in fitness. If the heart rate decreases, you're a loss in fitness. If it decreases, you expect an improvement in fitness. And if we think about what happened to different physical capacities. Now, if we look at what happened to the VAM-EVAL, a measure of MAS, to those who actually decreased their heart rate, their fitness improved as expected. However, if you look at those that showed an increase in heart rate, which we would expect to be a negative response, they actually showed no changes in MAS. So in this case, it's not as obvious as we wished, because in this case probably they were still able to maintain their performance despite maybe some, in this case it's kind of maybe losing a bit of fitness or losing some cardiovascular performance. But we know that the maximal test is also linked to your neuromuscular performance, is linked to other things, and that just shows that in this case maximal heart rate is not capturing what happens at the neuromuscular level. And this is confirmed by all the other dots on the right side, where you see that irrespective of the change in heart rate, there was no change in counter movement jump. There were no change in acceleration measure as a 10 meter. So changing in heart rate does not actually differentiate players that either improved or does not improve their neuromuscular performance. So that's, long story short, that just confirms that we are really trying to assess cardiovascular, the aspect of performance, but not the neuromuscular aspect. So it's not as straightforward at every individual level, and that's why those correlations are around those 0.6, 0.7. Hope that makes sense. And again, if one of you guys you want to add something, feel free.
No, perfect.
Okay. Awesome. So I'll move to another important aspect, and I'll let you, Shaun, to comment on this as well, about, again, changes in heart rate are not always what we think. And in this case, there would be another explanation.
Yeah, and guess what? This is another brilliant study that I didn't do. I just redrew it so it looked nice and pretty. What we have here is Martin was part of this it was a case study from Jan Lemmer. This is out in IGSPP, and they had an endurance athlete who was tested on a graded ramp test before and after a period of functional overreaching. So you can see the heart rate and the RPE responses in the blue. This is before functional overreaching. And then after, we have the orange responses here. We know the athlete was functionally overreached because of the training they've done. Classic sign of functional overreaching is increased heart rate recovery at submaximal workloads. So look at the arrows there. You can see the heart rate. When they're getting off the treadmill, they're dropping down quite a lot, and that heart rate's reducing. So interestingly, what we have here is after functional overreaching, clearly decreased performance. They couldn't finish stage 19. But when they did finish, they were at a much higher perceived intensity than beforehand. They were 20 out of 20 on the Borg RPE scale compared to 18 out of 20 before. But the key thing we're looking at here is a reduced heart rate response, particularly at submaximal loads. So look there where the arrows are. The heart rate response is there. The orange peaks and troughs are far lower than the blue. And this is in the presence of functional overreaching. The athletes weren't fitter. So heart rate is dropping off at submaximal loads. Great. We think that means improved fitness, but they're clearly not fitter. And just look at the RPE values as well. What we're seeing here is that a clearly increased perception of effort at every single workload. So I guess the learning from this and what the suspicion was is that in the presence of overreaching, a lot of things happen to your body. There's huge stress responses, and one of those is parasympathetic overdrive, where your parasympathetic system is firing so hard to try and de-stress you, hamper you, simmer you down, almost like get you in an ice bucket type effect. And as a result, that suppresses heart rate at maximal. You can't reach the same maximal heart rate, but also at submaximal workloads. So the things that we're going to talk about, these other nuisance variables, what can change heart rate or incorrectly change heart rate other than your cardiovascular fitness, the presence of chronic fatigue, and the mechanism through which we think is the parasympathetic nervous system.
And in this case, what's the best option to decipher from a drop in heart rate that is positive versus a drop in heart rate that is likely related to overtraining? What's the trick, or what's the?
Well, in this case, based on that, there's a couple of things that we would look into, and Martin's going to touch on a few. But for me here, the key telltale sign is reduced heart rate but increased perception of effort. If that was reduced heart rate and reduced perception of effort, and it was clearly off a decent training block, we could probably look at this as a fitness response. But the decreased performance or output combined with an increased perception of effort gives us the context around the drop in heart rate and whether it's good or bad.
Yeah, very good. Very good. So we discussed initially what we're trying to track is obviously cardiovascular fitness, but we know it's completely independent of everything that happens at the neuromuscular level. And actually some changes could be going into the opposite direction. That's why we also need to complement most of the time with those subjective response marker. And this is a very nice example. Now, to finish off, conscious of the time, there's also two important aspects that we need to mention, especially the acute, as a start, the acute of effect of the heat. And we know if you're exercising in a hot environment, there will be blood redistribution. Your blood will go to your skin to try to evaporate and to try to cool down. So because there's more blood in the skin, there's less blood at the central level, that means your heart rate will rise. So that's a typical effect of acute exposure. Which means for the same, let's say, expected level of fitness, just because you're training in the heat or doing the test in the heat, your heart rate will be higher. Conversely, that's the example on the slides. At some stage at Paris, it was -2, so super cold. And some stage during the preseason, we will be in Miami, 38. So that's about 40 degrees of difference. So of course, we cannot just use the heart rate measure as we collect them, because there's too much confounding factors or nuances factors, as Shaun was saying, that will affect the measurement. So we've built those kind of regressions, coefficient as a way to correct the influence of heart rate. And in this case, as you see, there's a bit of noise around, but there is this nice trend that every time the temperature rises by 10 degrees, heart rate increases by 1%. So that was our pilot data from PSG, and Tzlil run the same analysis with a bunch of data. So what was your data coming from?
Yeah, this data is coming from male, female senior football players here in Australia. This is from 2025 in season. It's quite interesting because some of this data has about 20, even more than 20 repeated observation per individual. across these data frame. And yeah, if you want the same analysis and you want a linear mixed model on it, what we've seen here is exactly what you find in Paris Saint-Germain, that for every 10 degrees, exercise heart rate is associated with, it will change or expected to change by 1% point approximately.
Exactly. So it's super cool. We were pretty happy to see that you guys had exactly the same trend, even running the
Yeah.
analysis 10 or 15, 10 years after. So
Yeah,
basically, what
and
does
we see it, sorry, man, we see it also now in one of Adriano's paper in AFL. So we've seen, I think it won 0.8, like very close to, or 0.9,
yes.
1% point.
Again, as we are discussing the pace, and we have to be pragmatic and simple. And it's easy to say, okay, now the temperature is 10 degrees higher than usual. So now that's the example of the bottom of the figure. We will just have to factor that in. So now the temperature is higher than usual. Let's take out a few percentage so that we would be the value will be the value as if it was actually less hot and vice versa. Now this is cooler than usual. Let's add a few percentage so that the response will be as if it was the normal temperature. So you got me when it's too hot, take out a few percent if it's not hot enough, and so on. So that's the point. The last aspect that we want to discuss, which is also an important potential, let's say, confounders in the response, is the influence of plasma volume on heart rate. So if we go back to the first figure that Shaun was commenting, of course, what matters in terms of oxygen delivery and the metabolisms is actually, I mean, it's oxygen delivery. And oxygen delivery is linked to your cardiac output. And your cardiac output is a product of your stroke volume and your heart rate. But what can affect very, very easily your stroke volume, which means ability of the heart to get more blood per beat, is we're saying the plasma volume that comes as well with heat exposure. So the longer you're exposed to the heat or the hotter the environment, your body will produce more blood volume. You can produce up to half of a liter to even 700 milliliters of more blood just because you've been exposed to the heat, which is a typical response to heat exposure. What happened in this case? More blood, more volume, more ventricular filling. So for the same cardiac output, your heart rate will drop as a response of this increase in plasma volume. And that would be the example of those different studies that we ran in Doha a while ago now, where you see on the left especially, if you look at the blue symbols, you see this expansion in plasma volume by 5 to 7% while training in the heat day by day. And this is kind of associated with the drop in heart rate. On the right side, it's how heart rate evolves throughout the camp in the heat. Same, you have very large drop in heart rate. And of course, having more plasma volume increase your heart performance, and it's kind of beneficial for your cardiovascular performance, but it's not a complete metabolic adaptation. There's nothing peripheral. It's very a central mechanical adaptation. So that will just sometimes augment a little bit, increase your perception of an improvement in fitness, which is definitely a fitness improvement, but there is some aspect that is a bit transient, more related to this increase in blood volume. So we have to be mindful when you see large changes in heart rate. And if you guys have been training in the heat, be mindful that it might be a bit exaggerated by the exposure of the heat. So that might be all on those confounding factors and the heat. And we may have a last figure to try to wrap everything together. I'll let you comment on that one, Shaun.
Yeah, we actually made this one, so I feel better talking about this now. We kind of tried to summarize the key bits in terms of what does a high acute short-term training load mean for heart rate in the submax test? Because it's going to influence it more than likely, but it's definitely not going to represent a change in cardiorespiratory fitness. And remember, that might be why we're doing it. If you train and you have a high volume of training as an athlete, you may experience plasma volume expansion or you may experience acute fatigue, but the two are mutually exclusive. It doesn't mean that they're both going to happen. You might get one without the other one. If you train and there's no substantive acute fatigue, your plasma volume will expand. And because of that, stroke volume will increase, as will end-diastolic volume and venous return. And that means heart rate on your submax test is likely to drop. So what this means is, yep, you've definitely got a good bit of training in the legs, but you're not fatigued. Because if you truly were fatigued, it would be more than likely to go the other way. And that's because in the presence of fatigue, you have increased sympathetic drive, reduced neuromuscular function, running economy, and as a result, that 12-kilometer-an-hour run that you've been doing for 2 years just feels a little bit harder. And as a result, your heart rate is going to increase. So that just helps us a little bit of a framework to help us help you guys maybe make some better or more informed decisions in and around the shorter term changes in heart rate that are likely nothing to do with cardiorespiratory fitness. But we have got more of this in part two.
Definitely. Yeah, in part two, we'll go through a complete decision tree based on this aspect and more that we're going to discuss as well. So I think it's been pretty dense, and especially the last part about the heat, the acute effect of the heat that we need to correct, the plasma volume, the fatigue, the lack of sedity to neuromuscular performance as well. So hopefully you can start to put all those pieces together. And again, we'll get back to that in the second part, and definitely wrap up with this big decision tree. So I think we're gonna leave it here for today. And if there's still time for a few questions, we're here for that. I see that Tina is back on the camera, so we are listening to you now.
Yeah, you guys are amazing multitaskers. I see there was some excellent questions from the audience, and Shaun and Tzlil have been busy answering them. And what we can actually do, since we are already a little bit past the time, we can send you the questions and the answers in the thank you email later on. So for those of you who were just listening to the experts and didn't have time to read them, you'll have a chance to see those as well. And yeah, we have our next session in 2 weeks. I think most of you have already signed up for that. So welcome to see you there. And if you want to take 1 or 2 questions, I think we can go over time just a little bit. And then after that, we can wrap up.
I've just been crazily going down the question Q&A chat. I've tried to summarize a few of them that are pointing around the similar things. And really interesting one is a few people are asking about, do we have normative ranges per sport? Can we do that? Ultimately, this is a very individual thing. So what we would say is best practice is just keep testing your athletes. And if you're doing this every week, in as little as 10 weeks, your athlete then has their own normative range. You get a good idea of what's low, what's high, respective to the period. When you've got a year or a season's worth of data, that's really valuable because you get true lows, true highs, and what is average or normal in the middle. But remember that there is a strong correlation. There's a strong correlation between the players who have the lower heart rates and who do better on maximal tests. So based on that, you could go rule of thumb. If player A's heart rate is lower than player B, then they're probably less fit. And again, sensible rooms of physiological heuristics. 70% for anyone is probably low. They're probably fit. 90% for anyone is probably high. They're probably unfit. And you can kind of work within those parameters until you have these individualized normal ranges. Little bits on scheduling. Yeah, we always try and sneak these in as part of the warm-up. You've nailed your submax testing if players don't even know you're testing them at all. Martin would have the guys come out and do the figure of 8 pretty much almost first thing, because for footballers, that is such a low intensity. For my rugby guys, we're not as fit, but we're also 100 kilo plus. Some of our heavier guys are 140. We do need to do a little bit of tissue prep, particularly around the calf, gastroc, ankle, soleus. And this is literally 5 minutes of general stuff, 3 minutes of submax, and then we're on to agility, high-speed running session.
Shaun, I'll just tap on this if that's okay. So I think, yeah, that's great. So the first thing with regards to scheduling, I think also for me and experience from a few consulting works, players really prefer to have very short warm-up beforehand. You've mentioned calf, so we've seen it with female football players as well. There were times they used to not do any warm-up before. They were quite niggling, and then we used to have like literally 3-4 minutes of a little bit of dynamic mobility, even on field, and if you want your individual prep, and this help a lot. And I think the second thing is sometimes is even also something that needs to be considered. It depends on the environment, but you need to consider the sensor connectivity, depends on what days you're doing it. So these 3 to 4 minutes will really improve sensor connectivity if you don't do anything beforehand, or it's quite dry outside. So this is also something that can help with the data itself. Martin, there were a few questions on the Q&A. regarding the scheduling. Is it weekly, when in the week, and things like that? And I thought that you might be able to give us some insight.
Yes, or not much if we keep that full for part two, because there's probably a lot to say. But as a teaser, we have to be mindful about normalizing plasma volume and these kind of things. So that's probably very important to think about days of rest, high intensity days as well. But I will definitely leave that for part two if it's okay.
Yeah, and on this teaser, so there was one question whether you do it every day, bi-weekly, and things like that. I think for a teaser, typically we feel that once a week or once in 2 weeks might be the best way to go. Or if you can do more, yeah, but this will be the minimum.
Yep.
All right, I think that's probably a wrap for today. I see a few people are dropping offline. We had I think well over 200 people at the best point. So huge thanks to all who joined the session today, and a special thanks to all three of you experts. Really know your stuff and great presentation. I'm looking forward to the next session. A little bit different time. I think it was 10 a.m. Finland time, 8 a.m. UK time. But anyway, earlier morning for some of you and later at night for the rest of you. But let's see you in 2 weeks. Thanks, everyone. Have a good night or a good day, and we'll continue from here. Thank you.
See you
Thank
next
you,
time.
everyone.
Thank you.